Okay, joining me now is Kevin Lucia. He's the reviews editor for Cemetery Dance magazine. His short stories, novellas, and nonfiction collections include Things Slip Through, Devourer of Souls, the Maurice Broaddus story, Through a Mirror Darkly, A Night at the Old Web, and Strange Days, as well as his contribution to the Hiram Grange series, Hiram Grange and the Chosen One. His column Horror 101, which, let me tell you right now, if you're not reading it, you need to unfuck that, because it's like my favorite thing out there right now, appears in Lamplight magazine. His short fiction has appeared in many anthologies. He teaches high school English and creative writing in New York. And Kevin, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's an honor to have you on finally, man. You were one of the people since we started this thing we wanted to have you on.
That's awesome.
Before Jesus died, when me and him and Dave were making up a list of people we would want to have on and talk to, you were on the list. So,
that's great. Yeah. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah. I should point out to the listening audience, we are not recording this in the studio, so yes, it sounds different. We're recording it in New York in a mansion. I don't want to say anything more than that because I don't want to out our host family who've been very kind in putting me up, but yeah, it's nice when wealthy people are patrons of the arts, man. They're
yes, absolutely
letting us take over their home here, and thank you to them. So I know where I want to go with this interview.
Okay.
I think we can talk about all this stuff. I don't think there's anything here that'll make you uncomfortable. If there is, just tell me. It's me. Throw my keys at me. They're laying right there. Early on, before you developed your own voice, and I should point out to the listening audience, I've been reading Kevin. Oh, God, I can't remember what the first thing was I read by you, but it was early in your career. It was after that MoCon.
Okay.
So however long that's been.
Yeah, that's been a while.
Yeah, but, what I noticed, there are hints of influence from Stephen King, Thomas Ligotti, H.P. Lovecraft in your work. I think critics have probably picked up on that as well. However, I would also suspect, and this is my own reading, hints of Isaac Asimov, Robert Heinlein. So I know it's a standard question I ask everyone, but in your case, I'm really interested. Who were your initial influences?
The very first thing, when I was a kid, I read everything. I was very omnivorous. Like, you could put the Hardy Boys in front of me, or the scary stories to tell. I read all that stuff. At our high school library, there are probably books that have only been checked out by me. Like, I got to that point in my senior year where I'm like, I've checked out every single book. This romance looks all right, and I would read it. But the first thing that I picked up on was the Foundation series by Isaac Asimov.
Called it!
And it was. I think it was Second Foundation, and I read it, and I was like, well, I gotta find all the other books. So I found, Foundation and Earth, Second Foundation, the whole thing. And then I think my senior year was when he came out with Prelude to the Foundation. So I'm like, oh, this is amazing.
Right.
And this big bomb went off in my head when he just, in one fell swoop, connected the robot novels to the Empire novels to the Foundation novels, and I'm like, it's our Daniel Olivaw, the whole thing. And it was like, that was my first exposure to this grand, sweeping epic where everything is connected. And it was, I just, I've heard a lot of people, I haven't read Isaac Asimov in a really long time, and I've heard some people complain about his prose. I don't know, it's been a long time, and I was a young guy. But that was the first author that I went back and read. And then, like, after he passed away, they commissioned some authors to pick up the Foundation series, so I went and read those two. So, yeah, it was, yeah.
I think Asimov, much like Lovecraft, it depends on when you discover him in life.
Yep.
Mary's dad, who is, what is he this year, 70, I believe. I just got him a signed Isaac Asimov novel, because it's the one thing he's always wanted that he's never had. And, yeah, he discovered him early on, and I think if you discover him later in life, maybe the writing doesn't hold up.
Right.
But
The Positronic Man, that was good too.
Oh,
I remember reading that. I remember reading that, and that was the first emotional reaction I had to a story. I remember this was sad. He wanted to, I want to be human, so I want to die.
Right.
And I was like, wow, so.
Right. Yeah. So eventually, you developed your own voice, your own style. I'm on record. I've said it elsewhere. I'll repeat it here on the show. You have one of the most distinguishable voices of your generation of writers. Beat that, Keelan. I know Keelan gave you a great cover blurb, but yeah. When you write, you have a way of disappearing. When the story begins, you're gone. The story tells itself, and I really admire that. We have a lot of new writers listening to the show. Tell them, how did you develop that?
And that was funny because early on, I went through that curve that all writers did. I tried to write like Stephen King, so I tried to copy, how he'll pause and like address the audience sometimes. Yeah. So I tried to do that. And,
hell, I wrote The Mist. Yeah. I literally typed it out, just to ape him.
Then I went through my Bradbury. I'm going to write everything like Bradbury because, I discovered Something Wicked This Way Comes, and I wanted to write one exactly like that. I still want to write my Evil Carnival novel someday. I want to call it The Autumn People. So someday that'll come out.
All right.
I actually even had an email conversation with his agent asking permission because I thought I was going to write it, and it never happened. But
yeah.
And I went through my Lovecraft phase where I'm like, everything was Eldritch and Icker, and so. And I can't tell you when the moment happened. There's a couple things that converged at once. First of all, for young writers, Borderlands Press Writers Boot Camp. Save your money. Go to that.
Absolutely.
Okay, go to that. And I think that was one of the first things. Douglas Winter is the most heartless. We're convinced he doesn't like words at all. Like, not even any words at all. Like, Mike Bailey and I will sit there and talk. Because Mike Bailey and I, it was cool to see how well Mike Bailey is doing. Because Mike Bailey and I were in the same, if you want to call it, graduating class of Borderlands.
Yeah.
Mike Bailey and I, we started together. And we will joke and be like, Doug will go over at Andrew and be like, okay, you can keep that one word right there. Everything else got to go. So that was, I discovered that you could streamline the story. The person who actually said something that really fired my brains off was our very first visiting author at Seton, because at that point I don't think I published a whole lot. But actually Dan Cohane said to me, I love it when you read a story and the words are gone.
Yeah.
The words are gone. And that was really, I think for me, I'm a merciless re-editor. I edit and go over. Even like things slip through. I remember getting into a conversation with somebody because they had read the original short story. Then they asked me when they read the collection, they liked the collection, but they're like, well, how do you feel about re-editing your short story over again? It's different from the first time. I'm like, well, this story had been published 5 years ago. And what I had learned was if I'm reading it and it knocks me out of the story, that's got to go.
Right.
And there shouldn't be, even if it's the Kill Your Darlings, even if it's a turn of phrase that you really like, if it makes me pause, if it doesn't sound logical, even if it's a really nice description, if it interrupts the flow, it's got to go.
Right.
And that's, I read, I'll get to a point where I read my manuscript out loud to myself. And how does this sound to my ears? I
always do that. Before I send it off to the pre-readers, I read it out loud to myself.
Yeah.
So, Dan Cohane, nice to see him get a shout out.
Yeah.
I've always felt he's one of those underrated writers that I just
very much.
I love his stuff, and it's like you want to thrust it into people's hands.
Yep, and he's a stand-up guy too.
Oh, he's hell of a guy, hell of a nice guy.
Yep.
Don't see him nearly enough.
No, I know. Yeah, I haven't seen him since the last Nikon that I was at.
It's the last time I saw him too. So while we're talking about your influences, here's something else I've always found interesting. You're a Christian.
Yep.
Who writes secular horror fiction. Now, you're not the first of those by any means. I mean, we've got Joe Nassis, Maurice Broaddus, Ronald Kelly. Mm-hmm. Ronald Kelly, I can remember, back in the days of Zebra. Uh-huh. He was probably the only person who had that claim. But did non-secular Christian horror authors like Frank Peretti or Ted Decker or the Left Behind books, did that ever have any impact on you?
Kind of. I still find today the whole Christian publishing phenomenon to be kind of, it's weird to me because, like I said, I grew up in a Baptist home. My dad was a deacon in our church, and I can't tell you that I have any terrible horror story. Our church was a good church with nothing but good memories, and but one thing that I was always very thankful for is, even my dad being a Christian, he never put any limits on my reading.
Right.
He always said he's reading. The only thing he ever told me one time, it's a funny joke, the only admonition he ever gave me about reading is I picked up a novelization of Star Trek The Motion Picture at a garage sale. And the only thing my dad ever said is like, Well, just be careful because you know that Jim Kirk. He's kind of, he likes the aliens. That's the only thing he ever said. He just let me read whatever I wanted to. So, like, I would take books out of the library. Our church had a library, so I took books out of the church library, but I didn't have any distinction. There was the Chronicles of Narnia, but I didn't, like, sure, you could see the Christian influences there, but I didn't recognize that there was this whole different industry. It didn't dawn upon me that there was a different industry until I went to Bible college, because I attended practical Bible college right here. They're now called Davis College for 2 years.
Right.
And I discovered, that's when I discovered Frank Peretti and Ted Decker. And there are a lot, nowadays, there are a lot of good, solid writers who are writing in that market that are good writers. And that is actually where I made my start. Right. I started reviewing, and I spent a year and a half reviewing solely Christian fiction and talking to other authors and dialoguing with them. There's an author by the name of Tosca Lee, who's a New York Times bestselling author, and she's a really good author. She's one of the first people I actually communicated with. There's another author by the name of T.L. Hines, who sadly does not write anymore. He had a brush with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. It went into remission, and I think he weighed, and you know how much it takes to be a full-time writer. He weighed that versus spending time with my family, and I just think he said he was done. Right. And I talked with a lot of them, and what the conclusion that I came to was that the Christian fiction field, if you're not writing the bonnet books, we like to call them, the Amish romances. Right. If you're not writing Amish romances, or your name's not Ted Decker or Frank Peretti, you don't really have a whole. I mean, like I actually read submission, guidelines that say character must do this, character must do this. The best description I ever had, I was listening to a visiting speaker at a church talk about Christian art, and his whole point was, there's art. And there's doctrine, and we don't necessarily need the doctrine for the art. He made the comparison of Christian fiction to porn. Follow me on this. Okay. He said, in porn, there's a little bit of plot, then some sex. A little bit of plot, then some sex. A little bit of plot, then some sex, and the whole book and the whole movie ends in an orgy. He said, well, with a Christian novel, we have a little bit of plot, somebody gets saved. A little bit of plot, somebody gets saved. A little bit of plot, everybody gets saved. And you know what? That's really apt. And it just got to the point where, like, some of the submission guidelines would be like, character must not do this, must not lie, must not drink, and then you're like, they must not be human. Then I guess. So then, as a Christian, you're really thinking, this isn't a portrayal of struggle or, crisis of conscience, or this is what real people go through. And an artist, I think an artist more than anything else, I know I'm aping, everyone does, when Stephen King says you must tell the truth. Right. I mean, this is not the truth. Nobody really acts like this. And also, too, I found that the market was like, I from the very beginning, I was interested in novels, short stories. Someday I'd love to be involved with comic books, things like that. In the Christian market, you're going to write novels, and that's it. Yeah. There's no, and also, too, there's no short fiction markets, or no. I noticed right away that in the horror, I think that the biggest item for me was that in the horror market, the boundaries between the mid list, the front list, and the small press are very porous. You have, I'm fortunate enough to share TOCs with, Paul Tremblay. Right. The Christian fiction market, that doesn't happen. They have a small press, and it's very ghetto. It's very like indie and doesn't have, and they also, I won't name names, but I spoke to a couple Christian authors that got very frustrated because they actually had exclusivity contracts where you could only write for that publisher. Could you write for another publisher under another name? You could. Or? You could. I had a brush. The only brush I had with writing with a Christian publisher was after the publication of Hiram Grange. I still had some contacts left, and I was talking with a speculative Christian publisher, talking about a supernatural thriller. And I told her, well, Hiram Grange there's nothing terrible in it, but it's got violence and action and swearing. And she's like, well, send me a copy of it, and I'll read it. And this pretty much was the deciding factor for me with Christian fiction. The editor emailed me back and said, I loved Hiram Grange. It was awesome, but you can't use your name. Wow. And I was like, well, and I almost went for it because I was thinking, write the novel, get the advance money. I mean, what was the concern? That their readers would
go to Amazon and see what else you've written, and they'd come across Hiram Grange, and therefore you're an imposter?
Then she admitted that their primary demographic was soccer moms, Christian soccer moms, and again they have a really weird attitude. I actually spent 1 year teaching. The nice thing about teaching at Seton, it's a Catholic school, but they're very professional about their education.
Right.
My very first year of teaching was at a little Baptist high school in the basement of a church, where you got paid like $16,000 a year, and then told you couldn't have a part-time job because you must rely on faith for God to provide the rest.
Right.
And you're like, that's not going to pay my rent. So the Christian publishing industry is the same way. They're like, this is a ministry. Like the deciding factor, I was reviewing, and I reviewed this awful novel. It was bad, and it was like, because you can't swear, and just the characters, and I gave it a 3-star, and I was like, this, that. The author actually emailed me and then was like, why are you attacking my ministry, and blah, 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 and I'm like, dude, it's a novel,
Right.
And that's what decided me. I was like, this is not, I don't want to be part of this, So, and like I said, it's also, too, if you're thinking about being a Christian and you want to write something of substance about actual struggle, there are guidelines. There's one author whose name is by the name of Mike Duran. I would recommend him.
Okay.
He's very political, but he's an excellent writer, and he finally said enough. And he self-published, and his first self-published novel was picked as a Publisher's Weekly Notable of the Year.
No kidding.
Because he just finally said, look, I can't tell a story if you're going to tell me I can't swear, I can't have sexual innuendo, I can't paint humans as humans.
Right.
And his first novel was called The Ghost Box, and the second novel was called Saint Death. And it's great, stuff, but he just got tired of it and said, I'm done.
That's always been my issue. And I should point out, I've read a fair amount of quote-unquote Christian fiction, starting with the Crusaders comics back in the 70s and 80s. You familiar with those? It was by Jack Chick.
Oh, of course. Well, I'm familiar with him because
those insane pamphlets. But he had a comic book line.
Okay.
And then I discovered Peretti. I ended up at a Christian music festival.
Interesting.
The Creation Festival.
Oh, yeah, I know Creation. Yeah, that's that, yep.
Yeah, I went because there was a girl that I wanted to hook up with. Of
course.
And I thought...
And from what my friends told me, a fair amount of hooking up went on at these Creation.
Well, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's like ostensibly a Christian Woodstock or a Christian Lollapalooza.
Yes, yep.
There's tents and there's campers and there's RVs. And yes, I can vouch a lot of hooking went up with there. I never hooked up with the girl I went there to hook up with, but I had a good time that weekend.
Right.
But it introduced me to author John Bowden, and I have talked about this. Bands like Petra, Resurrection Band,
I remember Petra.
Mylon Lefevre, who to this day I say put on one of the best concerts I've ever seen. But I felt like an outsider at this thing, right? But then I meet this other girl that weekend because they've got like a store set up in the field, and they're selling books and albums, and the girl's like, she sees me reading Stephen King, and she's, you should try Frank Peretti. I think it was Piercing the Darkness.
Oh yeah, okay.
And like, this is really good.
Yep.
The people aren't quite real. They're like Stepford people.
Yes,
there's no drinking, there's no cursing, but so I don't know. I did not care for the Left Behind books. I liked the first one, but after that, it just...
I liked the first 3. Somewhere around book 10, and then when they were cranking out a soundtrack and cranking out a kid's version and cranking out a graphic novel, I'm like, okay, this is a nightmare. Yeah, like the first couple were good, but then again, like... when you're thinking about the rapture and what an awful thing, and I'm probably could be accused of sucking up, but when you think of The Long Road Home,
Take the Long Way Home, yeah.
The Long Way Home. Now that is the rapture in its horror.
Yeah.
And the Left Behind series had some of that in dribs and drabs, but just, and like I said, that one got dragged out too much.
I gave that one to my grandma. My grandmother, she's 92 this year. She's a Southern Baptist, has been all her life, and she would get so flustered. She believed that I was using this talent that God gave me, and I wasn't glorifying Him. So when I wrote Take the Long Way Home, I gave her a copy. I'm like, Grandma, this is the closest I'm ever going to get.
Right. Yep.
All right, and she read it. She didn't like all the cursing and all the violence. So maybe there's something to that, the Christian publisher guidelines, keeping that stuff out.
Well,
maybe it's for grandma and the soccer moms,
That's what I eventually decided. It was kind of useless, and that's like Mike Duran decided the same thing. It's kind of useless because they have a market. They know who they're marketing to. They do it very successfully, and let's be honest, if there's readers for that market, they're supplying that market. And that's when I just decided this is just not the place for me. And that's about the time that I discovered Maurice Broadus and Ron Kelly and all those guys, and be like, I can do this. I could jump over and
right.
So, yeah.
So eventually you did. You made a name for yourself secularly. I don't guess, judging on what you're saying here, that you would ever go back and write something aimed at that market. I
don't think so, because I've got the comfort zone now with Joe at Crystal Lake, or even just the idea that you can write. Like I've read enough stuff that I can write something that's going to be true to my values. But then if you write it well, you'll be able to find a place for it.
Right.
And I just wouldn't go back to that. And again, because I'd have to use a different name.
Right.
And at this point, unless the advance was big enough. But there's stories of that too. That's also kind of what swayed me, is I heard stories from reliable sources that some of these Christian authors are using pen names. And that's the only reason why they're doing it is because they're collecting royalty checks and they're off writing something else. And here they are just sniping the Christian market and collecting royalty checks.
I have no trouble believing that.
Yeah.
I have no trouble believing that. So, I know a lot of the listeners out there, they hear Christian horror and, they get visions of LaHaye and Jenkins proselytizing, but, that's not you at all. You don't go around preaching or trying to save your fellow secular writers. You've never once witnessed to me. What I respect about you is you show by example. You're kind, you're considerate, you're professional. I've always seen you be professional with our peers, with your publishers. If you weren't professional with your publishers, somebody would tell me about it. Even when they give you reason not to be, you're professional with them. You also don't get involved with or comment on the bullshit that breaks out in this industry sometimes. I mean, it's really commendable. But what I'm curious about, are there times where this industry tests your faith?
Yes, I don't think it tests my faith in the erosion factor. Not in the sense that I have ever been like, oh, that's offensive or that's challenging, but and I haven't been on the road nearly as much as you have or anything like that. But when you get out to, there was a couple of years there where I was, at 4 or 5 conventions a year,
right.
A 3-year stretch. And when you get out there and you're hanging out, you're away from your family, and like I said, I never did anything, I didn't ever drink too much, but there's a slow drift that occurs that you're not really aware it's happening.
Oh, yes.
And my wife and I actually kind of went through this the last year or so. We kind of had a meeting of the minds, and she said, I would never tell you to stop writing. I would never tell you to stop writing horror. But, we kind of had to, for example, for many years there, I was getting up at 2:30 in the morning and writing, and it was mostly just because I'm kind of a freak of nature and I can go on 5 hours of sleep. Brian says that's going to end soon. So, and plus, my kids, they wake up at 6, and it's like they're like, boom. Well, not so much my daughter. She's finally discovering the wonders of sleep because she's 11 going on 19. But she's kind of like that surly teenager sometimes in the morning. But, and I used to always get up and then spend some time in prayer and reading my Bible. But it was a good thing. I started having deadlines.
Right.
Publishers started wanting things, and I'm like, I want to get this done, and I want to hit that anthology. And it can be, and I'll be honest, we're not talking like contracts with big publishers, things like that. But when you start at $25 token pays, for the love, and suddenly you're like, man, they asked me for a prorate story, I need to get that done.
Right.
Suddenly a year goes by, and you're like, when's the last time you touched your Bible? When's the last time you and your wife spent time together? And that's where the testing of my faith. Like I get frustrated with Christians who judge others, especially because there's so many Bible verses that say, look, the judgment should come within the body of believers. So if I got my friend Jack over here, professes to be a Christian, loud and proud,
right,
and then he's off doing stuff off the side, as a Christian, I should say to him, this is what you're saying, but this is what you're doing. If the person doesn't share the same faith, there's clear scripture that says That's not your concern.
Right.
And I live that. It's not my concern. They treat me fair, I'll treat them fair. So I've never had an issue with my faith there, but I came to kind of a moment of kind of like, well, what are your priorities here? Like you were saying, God gave me this talent,
right.
And he wants me to use it. And like I came to a place where I'm like, I don't think God needs me to stamp a cross on my stories to be serving him with my talent. But then you're like, and I'm not an abusive father. I'm not a neglected father. But then you can drift and be distant. And Abby would even say to me, she's like, I don't like it when you're in your final draft.
Yeah.
Because you're not here.
Yep.
You're doing your final draft. And we just got to the point where we even decided to take a year off of cons, entirely, because we started traveling together as family, and that was okay, because she actually told me, it was about 4 years ago, I think, after the first AnthoCon, we started talking, and she said, and at that time, Zach was starting to get a little bit more of a handful, when Dad's not home. That's when the son says, ha ha, Dad's not home. And Abby is definitely stern and things like that, but there's a marked difference when I'm not around.
Yeah.
So we started talking, we should travel together as a family to conventions. We did that for a while, and that was okay. It actually worked out really well at AnthoCon. It's kind of why I'm sad that AnthoCon went away, because that became a really nice, but even a pattern there started developing. I do con stuff during the day.
Right.
They'd go do other stuff. After the day was over, we'd go out and get dinner. Then she put the kids to bed, and because Zach wasn't old enough to leave alone in the room, well, she would stay in the room, and I'd go back down and hang out with the writers.
Right.
Again, you're not doing anything wrong, but when you start calculating how much you actually see your family this weekend, they're up there in they're up there in the hotel room, and you're down here till 2 o'clock in the morning.
My ex-wife and I tried that. Yeah. Post Girl in the Glider, she said, well, maybe I'll go to these conventions with you. And we did too. We did World Horror in Toronto, and we did an econ. And the World Horror in Toronto is what killed it. Someone who I won't name on the air, but you and I both know him. He's another writer. Said to her on Sunday as the convention was ending, oh, I didn't realize you were Brian's wife. If I'd known that, I would have talked to you this weekend. That was the same convention where a young girl, well, she wasn't young, but she's in her 20s, but I signed her books, and my ex-wife and I, we wanted some alone time, and we start leaving the dealer's room, and we're walking through the hotel lobby, and the girl's walking with us, and she's talking, up, 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 up. And we get on the elevator, and she gets on the elevator with us, up, 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 up. We get off the elevator at our floor, she gets off with us, up, 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 and we open our hotel room door, and she tries to come in with us. So, yeah, that was the moment when she and I think, I can't speak for her, and I would never out her on the air, but I think that was the moment when she decided, yeah, it's more than the drift. I just can't be a part of this world.
Right.
So.
And I think actually Abby even said that to me once. She said, and she didn't say it quite so much that way, but she did say, she's like I said, she said, I would never ask you to stop writing. I would never ask you to... And she actually said, I think it'd be dangerous if you stopped writing.
Right.
And I have to say this first. I have to give complete props and utter grace. I mean, I've seen a lot of guys who are talented writers, and because they had no support at home, their careers never went anywhere.
Yeah.
And Abby has always been so supportive, even on Facebook. Like, she shares everything. She's like, oh, come to Kevin's book signing. She'll take my books to work. And actually, she's a pretty good salesman. Apparently, nurses like horror.
Oh, yes. I can vouch for that.
She takes them to work, and she's always like, look at this that Kevin did. So she's been utterly supportive, and she would never, she actually even told me it would be a bad thing if you stopped writing.
Yeah.
But she said to me one day, she's like, the writing world is a world I don't understand. So these people understand you in a way that I never can. And she's like, I'm okay with that. She's like, but when you're gone at these cons so much, it's like they have an access to you that I can't have.
Right.
And she's like, I don't know what to do with that. She didn't say it, come right out and say she was jealous.
That's beautifully put. She's absolutely right.
Yeah. And she's always been such an excellent, like, again, I'm a pretty stereotypical guy. I'm kind of oblivious, I just kind of pop along and think like, hey, everything's okay, And she's got a very good way about saying we need to discuss this.
Yeah.
We need to get this taken care of. So,
Well, good for you, man. Good for you. So let's switch gears. Most of your fiction takes place in or is linked to the fictional town of Clifton Heights, New York. Was that intentional at first? I mean, we talked about Asimov and how he connected everything. Did you know starting out that you wanted to build a mythos and everything would be interconnected, or
not necessarily? I knew I always wanted to write something taking place in the Adirondacks because that was our vacation spot growing up. Every year we went to the Adirondacks, and then when Abby and I first got married, they had a friend who had a cabin up in the Adirondacks. We will go every year up the Adirondacks. I just love the atmosphere up there. It's just and I'm speaking as a non-Adirondack person. Probably Adirondack folks who live there all their life, it's like every day for them. But there's just something denser up there, so I always wanted to write something there. What really happened was I kept trying to write a novel. I hadn't really learned how to plot yet, I hadn't really. So what I had was all these vignettes of all these isolated characters, because I was also trying to recreate The Stand, where you've got like 14 characters. And, my first couple of things were like, let's write The Stand and let's write It and mash it together and have like 90 characters with all the. So
that's what The Rising was. It was me aping the Stand,
And so I had all these characters, and the thought crossed my mind, these could all be characters, in the same town, and that would be kind of cool. Now, of course, at that point, like every young writer, you're thinking, nobody's done this before. This is so original. And then when you finally discover, the Cedar Hill series with Gary Brownback, and you notice the Castle Rock stories, and then if you start reading, Bradbury's books where everything happens in Greentown, Illinois.
Straub's Millhaven.
Exactly. And then finally when I discovered Oxrun Station by Charlie Grant, but that didn't discourage me any. That sort of solidified it. I really love, people will always slam on Keene for interconnecting everything. I'm a geek about this. So everyone hates the Tommyknockers because the guy goes to Derry and sees Pennywise. And I'm like, I love it. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So that kind of confirmed for me that's what I wanted to do. But the thing that I was always concerned about is, you don't want to write a book 1, then a book 2, and a book 3 where you have to read. And that was what I was always really impressed by Charlie's work, is the Oxrun Station novelettes and the novels. They would reference other characters, and if you hadn't read the other books before, it'd be throwaway.
Right.
You wouldn't necessarily need those other books, but once you started reading all these other books, it was like this massive, and it's a shame because you almost feel like that jigsaw puzzle never got a chance to get finished.
I know.
But it's like this massive jigsaw puzzle, and I thought to myself, that's the way I want to do it. I don't want any of my books to have to be read in any certain order. So that developed from there. And I got to also give props to Joe Meinhardt from Crystal Lake. Crystal Lake was really young, and they bought a story from me for Fear of the Night. And then he said, well, I'd love to have a short story collection from you.
Right.
And I said, okay, I don't want to just give you 10 stories. I said, nobody knows who I am. Why are they going to just read 10 stories? I said, I want to do a linked connection. I want to do a linked collection with a framing device. Are you willing to roll with that? He's like, sure, I'll roll with that. And that's what. And I was so grateful that he was willing to experiment with that and let me do that.
I'll give a shout out to Joe too, because Crystal Lake buys a lot of ads on this show.
Yeah.
Do you worry? Like you said, your stuff. It's very easily accessible. Mm-hmm. Somebody out there listening to this show, hey, I want to check this guy out. You can literally start anywhere. You don't have to have read anything else. But do you worry as these stories progress that that's going to change? I mean, is there an end game in mind?
There's a critical mass somewhere. You wonder about that. I think the key thing will be, if I keep writing in this mythos, is you can't stay with one character too long, because you're like, how much insanity can this one character take in this one town before they go crazy? And even that, so much when. That's why I'm currently. I had a novel. It was actually a weird Western with Billy the Kid that sort of fell along the wayside. And I picked that back up again, basically because Ron Malfi was basically harassing me about a year ago. You've got a whole novel and you're not doing anything with it? I'm like,
love you, Malfi.
And then Josh Palmatier, I don't know how many listeners are into fantasy, but Joshua Palmatier is I don't really read fantasy. I don't like fantasy, just because it's not my thing. But his is the only fantasy series I've really read. It's called The Skewed Throne.
Yeah.
He said the same thing, because he lives here locally and he teaches at Oneonta State. And he said, "You got a whole novel. Why don't you start submitting that to the critique group so we can start looking at it?"
No, was that novel? Because I remember back in like 2012, 2011, you were telling me about a novel you were working on called The Drift. And I've never seen it announced. Was that the Billy the Kid novel?
No, The Drift was a novel that fell apart. I've had a hard time with the novel until I finally broke down and started plotting. I found a lot of success with the short stories and novellas, just letting them sprawl.
Right.
But what I found is The Drift is there. I've got 600 pages of The Drift, and I figure 400 pages are salvageable, and I'll probably go back to it someday. But I had 2 or 3 novels in a row that I didn't plot, and I just sort of wrote. And they got so heavy, everything sort of The Billy the Kid was an interesting story because I had an opportunity to pitch something to Harper Keene, the senior acquisitions editor. It was the time when the mashups were really popular.
Right.
Little Women Vampires, Romeo and Juliet and Vampires.
Pride and Prejudice and Zombies.
Right. And it was for Harper Keene, and the thing I wanted to do was as an English teacher, I've always loved the idea of the Beowulf story. But the prose is... when you think of the Beowulf story, that was an oral tale,
right?
And that's where it gets its power. So reading the prose is a interesting exercise as an English teacher, but it can be and I wanted to update that.
It's not accessible.
Yeah. It's like I said, it's an interesting intellectual exercise for an English teacher. I wanted to update it, but then I was like, well, if I update it to the modern time, what you got then is like an urban fantasy monster hunter. And I went back actually one day, looked at the teen spec fiction, and like, urban fantasy. Okay. So I thought to myself, well, why don't you put it in the Wild West? We're updating it, but there's still plenty of room. And at the time, I was reading a lot of Ron Howard.
Right.
And there's this one great story that I'm not going to remember. It's about this guy. It's a weird Western where this guy's caught in the middle of this feud, and he shoots it out. And then he stumbles into this underground cave where these snake people.
Oh, yeah.
And it was such this is awesome.
Yeah, fuck, what was that?
Yeah, I can't remember the name of it. And these snake people, and then this corpse.
Well, and it tied into his Cull mythos eventually, too.
And I'm like, you got to write a weird Western. And this little voice in my head goes, you need to make it Billy the Kid. Because then I thought to myself, well, the core of the Beowulf story is a town is being menaced by a monster. They're like, we need a hero. Beowulf and those guys say, we're here. So I'm like, we need a Western frontier town that needs a hero. And you've got Billy the Kid and the Regulators.
Right.
And I found this sweet spot in history. According to all the history I could find, after the Lincoln County Wars were over, they go to Tascosa, Texas.
Yes, they did.
They sort of break up.
Yep.
They sort of break up. And I'm like, we need to write the stories of why they broke up. And I also found a cool little thing. There's a frontier doctor by the name of Dr. Henry Hoyt. And I guess he met Billy on 3 occasions. He met him in Tascosa. There's a semi-mythical legendary card game in Vegas that's supposed to have Billy, Jesse James, and this Dr. Hoyt. Then Dr. Hoyt meets him at the very end of the hotel in the prison before he escapes from Garrett the last time. So what I pitched to the editor was, well, this weird Western with Billy the Kid. It was right about the time of Cowboys and Aliens. And the editor goes, I love it. I love it. She's like, let me talk to my boss first because I don't want you to write it.
Right.
She goes to her boss, and she goes back. She's like, my boss is afraid the sales team won't get it. They won't know how to market it.
Isn't that what it always comes down to?
But, the idea was so strong that I wrote it and literally hand wrote a 120K manuscript. And I cut it down, and then I cut it some more. I think in the end, it may have been a case of I was just reading it too much. And if you've read the Clifton Heights stories, those are very atmospheric Charlie Grant.
Right.
There was a fair amount of gunplay and action in this, so I started getting a little insecure in my action scenes, and so I just shelved it. And until Ron Malfi started bugging me about a year ago. So.
Again, love you, Malfi. So what's the status of it right now?
He's reading it for me, and he's looking at it, and then my critique group is going to start reading it chapter by chapter, and I'm going through and editing it, thinking to myself, oh, this really isn't nearly as bad as you thought it was. Because it's got Billy the Kid, it's got these monsters, it's got Solomon King and the stones of fire from the Ark of the Covenant.
I will make you an offer right now. I will take it from Maelstrom if you haven't sold the limited edition rights.
I did no rights have it, so I mean,
all right.
Yeah, as soon as
Malfi, hurry up with it. And maybe you have to write an introduction, but we'll pay you for that. I had no idea. This is awesome.
Yeah.
I'm a huge Billy the Kid freak.
I tell you, he's like, and I'm not being heretical when I say this. I mean, you go down there in New Mexico and say Billy the Kid, it's like saying Jesus.
Yeah.
I mean, he's just worshipped down there. So, and I'll be very honest. I read up on the real Billy the Kid. My Billy the Kid's the mythical pulp, Stone Cold Killer. I loved it, and I really enjoyed, and I don't know if I did it successfully, time will tell. I really enjoyed trying to figure out where was the human Billy the Kid in all of this.
Right.
Yes, he's learned he's good at killing. But what's that got to do to a person?
Right.
To learn it. This is the only thing I'm good at, is killing people.
Right.
So hopefully it will see the light today. I said,
Well, I think you're good at much more in real life other than killing people. Maybe you have a dark side. I don't know. But I mean, you work full time. You're a teacher. Mm-hmm. You're a father. Mm-hmm. You're very involved in your church. When do you find time to write? Now, we touched on it earlier. Getting up early is that how you do it?
Yep. It was about when how long ago was it? It was when my son was born. I tried the late night, right? Like I said, and it's funny too because I only learned discipline when I suddenly had no time. Before kids, I would just kind of write willing. Before kids, I was one of those. Oh, I need to write when the spirit moves. So I would go weeks without writing and then binge write for 2 or 3 hours. But when kids started coming, and especially when my son was coming, I'm like, man, I'm not going to have any time to write at all. How am I going to do this? And I remember, actually, it was a Christian fiction author at the time because that's what I was following. But his name's Robert Liparulo, and he's one of the few that I really liked. He wrote a lot of action novels.
Right.
And he said that what did it for him is he started getting up every morning at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
And I know I've always been a better get up in the morning person. Especially as an English teacher, trying to write something productive by 9 o'clock at night.
No, there's no way.
Happen. So I started experimenting with waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and sometimes waking up at 3:30, and it stuck. So I've been doing that ever since the beginning. Yeah. And the funny thing is, I found now that I've gotten so conditioned. If I have a whole day to myself, I can write steadily until about 10 in the morning. I can't write in the afternoon because I've just gotten used to writing in the morning.
I start around 5. Mm-hmm. And usually I find between 6 in the morning and noon is my most productive time. Now I can keep going till 4 or 5. Right. But then after that I'm brain dead. Yep. What's interesting is Mary only starts going around 3 or 4 in the afternoon. Yep. Yeah, and she'll go to 1 or 2 in the morning. Yep. So our writing schedules are very, very different. When we're living together, that's going to create all kinds of chaos, I think. But maybe not. I don't know.
But I could say the big thing, though, again, any young writers is, and again, at this time, I was also reading On Writing by Stephen King. Right. And he said basically you have to develop something where you do it every day. Exactly. And that's what I found is it's mind-boggling. I'm at a position right now where I'm putting the final edits before a beta reader on a short story collection, another one for Crystal Lake, another Link collection. I've got the Billy novel that's done. I have another novel that's almost done that I told Paul from Thunderstorm that I'd sent to him a year ago, and then it sort of fell apart. But they're almost done, and I've got all this work because I just write every day. Right now, I've pared it down to writing an hour a day, but if you just did that 5 days a week and never missed a day, in a year, you've compiled a lot of work. You absolutely have. Yeah, so there's no binge writing. It's just you just do it every day. Yeah. And there are times, too, that where I'm your typical... Okay, I'm waiting for Zach to get off the bus. I got 15 minutes, So, I'll do it whenever. So there are times where I can't get an idea out of my head, so I'll pull a pad out at lunch at school, and I'll write then, too. So, yeah. All right. Well, Kevin, I know you. Speaking of school, I know you got to get up and teach in the morning, and it's getting late. Before we send it back to Dave in the studio here, where can folks find you online? www.kevinlucia.com. And Lucia is Lucia. Yep. You do the Facebook and the Twitters and all that, but
your website is where they should go.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for coming in, buddy.
Thank you for having me.
And what should they buy?
What should they buy? Really, the first short story collection, Things Slip Through.
Yeah,
that's what starts everything off.
I'd agree with that.
And the one that I really, I don't want to say I'm proudest of, but the one that I'm proudest of is the upcoming novella that's coming from Cemetery Dance, Mystery Road. I just love the heck out of that book.
Right.
So, but Through a Mirror Darkly was my. Here you go, Charlie Grant.
I think that's your best work.
And I felt like it was, and it's like here's a novella quartet that that I wanted to write. And, yeah. So
I'm really psyched for this Billy the Kid book, though.
I tell you one thing, it was the most fun I've ever had writing it. So I really hope it's good too. I really enjoyed writing it because Guns and Monsters. How much more fun is it than that? So.
All right. Well, Kevin, thanks so much, man, for sitting down with me. And Dave, back to you.